Hi everyone, my name's Stacy Penna. I'm with QSR International. I'm the NVivo Community Director, and I'm excited today that we have one of our NVivo certified trainers, Noelle Wyman-Roth, who will be presenting today. I'm just going to do a quick intro of myself, and then Noelle will get right into the demonstration. So like I mentioned, I'm the NVivo Community Director, which means I'm creating a community around connecting fellow researchers that do qualitative and mixed methods research, creating a community of practice around that, and really we want to do it across organizations and within disciplines. So just some also other housekeeping. One, I have a link in the chat area. If you'd like to join the community, you can just go to that link and join. Also, to the right, you'll see an orange box, a white arrow. If you click on that white arrow, it opens up your GoToWebinar menu, and you can feel free to type in questions as we go through the presentation. We'll take questions at the end, but feel free to type them in as you go. You are all muted just because it's easier to hear or to have us hear Noelle today. And we are recording this, so you'll get a copy of the recording in a day later with a follow-up email. So with that, I will turn it over to Noelle.
Thank you very much, Stacy. Hi, everyone. This is me. Thanks for having me, Stacy. I'm really excited to talk about program evaluation and using NVivo. So first thing is that, of course, I'm an NVivo trainer. So what that means is I help run online courses, I do consultations, and sometimes I go out and do on-site trainings. But my full-time job, I actually work at a university. And part of my job involves program evaluation with an organization within a university. And I have been teaching and using NVivo for the better part of a decade, which is pretty hard to believe. And I've been doing qualitative research, of course, during that time, but I began including evaluation as part of my professional practice about 3.5 years ago. And I have been involved in numerous projects through my full-time role at the university as well as a consultant. And it's been a really fun journey. I've been involved in many dozens of NVivo projects, both research and evaluation, and wanted to share some of my experience with you today and talk a little bit about how we've used NVivo through this process. And I'm really excited about this topic because I'm passionate about the use of qualitative data in research and evaluation to illuminate the how and the why things are happening. And I'm also passionate about doing applied work. About using data to make decisions, to do good, to better programs, and therefore, make the world a better place. So, small task. So again, today, grounded in my own experience, I want to describe how to use NVivo in program evaluation, and I'll be sort of going back and forth between a more purely qualitative lens as well as a mixed methods lens, because I know many of us are involved in mixed methods work, myself included. So just a brief introduction to NVivo. So NVivo can be used throughout the research process or evaluation process, including it can help manage your data, help automate some of your analyses, help promote a rigorous analysis, help you share your findings, and collaborate with others. You can use a wide range of data in the software, and that's one of the reasons why it's really cool to use for evaluation. So just a brief rundown, of course, you can bring in text and PDF, so Word documents, PDFs, TXT files. You can also work with audio and video data and image data, and one of the things I want to talk about today is how you might work with something like photo voice in NVivo. You can bring in survey data, including in the Windows version connecting directly with Qualtrics and SurveyMonkey, as well as bring in spreadsheet data that you might have saved as an Excel, as well as a variety of other formats, including exporting from reference management software like RefWorks, Zotero, EndNote, and Mendeley. And I will touch a little bit on how you can use NVivo for literature review, which is often at the beginning of the evaluation process as well. So you can just bring in the PDFs directly, or if you've got compiled literature in one of these reference management softwares, you can export those and bring those into NVivo as well. So why include qualitative data and program evaluation? So if you're on this webinar, I may be preaching to the choir, but I did want to touch on this briefly. So qualitative data, this is disclaimer, this is my view, although I do think that it is very much grounded in my experience and in professional practice across evaluation. So I believe it's so beneficial in evaluation because so much of this work involves telling a story. So in some cases, qualitative data collection is the only option. You have relatively few number of participants, or it's the only appropriate method for your evaluation question. But in my experience, when we include qualitative data collection, we always learn something about the program from both qualitative and quantitative data collection. And we often learn different things, or it can point at the same thing. So in that, we call that in research triangulation, sort of validating what we're finding in one data source from another. So for instance, I'm working on an evaluation right now where there are different program components to support beginning teachers. And in the survey, everybody said, we really love this coaching aspect, and it scored the highest among the program components. And we were like, okay, great. And then we did interviews with participants, and they told us why that was and what was so helpful about coaching. And that was really beneficial as well to inform the program development. One thing that evaluators, I think, are in general turning their attention to are culturally responsive and equitable evaluation. And qualitative data can be a way to include and elevate voices of program participants in a way that purely quantitative can struggle to, and it can help you achieve a more, or work towards a more equitable evaluation. And finally, from a program provider's perspective, it can be really impactful, like when reporting to a funder or sharing with other stakeholders, to share quotes, to share the words of those who are participating in their program. All right, so what can NVivo do in program evaluation? So it can organize and support the analysis of qualitative data. So one thing I always caution as a trainer is that it's not an easy button, but it can support a more in-depth traditional qualitative data analysis, as well as there's some tools that can help you get a speedier view of what's happening in your qualitative data. So I'll touch on those today. We'll also explore a little bit the way that NVivo can bring together multiple types or sources of data into one place, including quantitative data. So for instance, if you have survey data that has open and closed-ended questions, you can definitely bring that into NVivo. I did want to say that even though you can bring in SPSS files and you can bring in quantitative data into NVivo, it's not a statistical software. So it can do some limited frequencies and counts, but if you want to do anything more sophisticated than that, then you're going to look at a statistical software. Me personally, I work very frequently as a team, and that's one thing that's been really helpful with NVivo is that you do have the ability to work collaboratively, as well as generate quantitative measures of integrated reliability. That's not something I'll focus on today, but I did want to make sure I mentioned that. And another thing that I found really valuable in using NVivo for program evaluation is that often, and ideally, you're working with a program over a number of years, and you can build out this database of organized, analyzed data in one place and look across the years and look across the data quite easily. So that's been really beneficial. Today, I'm going to start by talking about survey data. And so surveys are very common in evaluation, maybe too common. And we'll talk about how you can bring in your whole survey, so both the qual and the quant, and analyze your open-ended survey questions systematically, and how we can use the closed-ended survey questions to explore themes in your open-ended data. We'll talk a little bit about how NVivo can support the analysis of data collected using innovative methods. So I'm going to just play with an example of photo voice. I have some really limited sample data. As you can imagine, I didn't want to draw on my own evaluation data. So I've got some sample data today we'll play with. Photo voice is a really interesting approach, and we'll talk about what that is if you don't know. I've also used NVivo for visual reflection, so where we've had participants cut out pictures from magazines and create collages of how they felt before and after the program, and taken pictures of that, transcribed their comments, and analyzed those in NVivo. Traditionally, lots of folks may like to do interviews or focus groups when they are collecting qualitative data. And so I'll touch on how you can bring NVivo, you can use NVivo to bring those in as well and analyze those and bring them together with any other data sources you might have. And finally, I'll chat a little bit about how you can use NVivo to support your work throughout an evaluation cycle. So organizing, doing some organizing work, things like, you may start with a lit review and how you can, or a review of program materials and how you can do that in NVivo. We're often creating theories of change in our logic models with our program partners, and how you can use mapping tools in NVivo to do that. And also keep track of meeting minutes, both within your evaluation team and with your partners, and you can do that in NVivo as well. All right, so with that, I'm going to switch gears. And Stacy, can I just confirm that everybody can see NVivo now?
Yes, we can, thanks.
Yeah, so I'm going to be working out of NVivo Plus today. So there are two versions of NVivo 12. There's Pro and Plus has some automated coding features that I want to demonstrate today. So I'm going to go ahead and start a blank project. And I'm just going to call it whatever I want to call it. This is a demonstration, so we'll program eval demo, and note that it's saving in my downloads folder. I can save it elsewhere. Downloads is fine for right now. That's sort of my go-to for, oh, this is just a temporary file, but you could certainly tell it to save to documents or your desktop. One thing I do want to caution is that saving directly to the cloud can be problematic for the software because of the way that it's built. So always work from your desktop or some other place on your computer, not the cloud, when you're actively working in NVivo. Okay, for those of you who are new to the software, NVivo has some built-in organizational features over here to the left. So places, here's where you would put your data. So your files go in this folder. Your nodes are what you use to analyze your data. So these are all empty because it's a blank file. We'll also touch briefly on cases today, particularly when we bring in our survey data and case classifications. When I teach classifications, it's really corny, but I have folks do a call and response to help them remember that classifications are for quantitative data. So that's the tool in NVivo that helps you organize your quantitative data that you might have as part of your survey. Memos would be where you store any notes that you have, and we'll play a little bit with some of these search features, our queries, nothing here yet, as well as our maps today. So I'm going to start in files because the first thing I have to do is bring in the data that I've collected. And I am going to, I've got some Excel data, and I'm just working with this, it's a sample budget consultation survey that's included as part of the NVivo Plus Automated Insights sample project. And it was looking at how the survey is from the UK, I believe, and looking at how the budget might need to be adjusted in a community. So when I bring in a survey in NVivo, you'll notice that it's bringing up the screen to tell me a little bit about what it's going to do to my data. So NVivo is going, the survey import wizard in NVivo is going to undertake a number of steps to get my data ready to work with. So the first thing is that your survey should be set up so that each response is in a row and each question is in a column. Recommend no more than 2 heading columns, and I further recommend just 1. And typically what I do is bring my data down out of Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey, clean up the heading columns. But you can clean your data within NVivo as well. I just like to do it outside. So each row will be stored as a case. And so each of the open-ended responses from a given participant, their open-ended data will be organized in a case. So that's the tool that NVivo uses to organize the data belonging to a particular participant or unit of analysis. Closed-ended survey questions get created as case attributes. So those are part of a case classification. So that's going to be my quantitative data. And then one feature I really like is that it's going to code by column. So the open-ended survey question is going to be created as a node within NVivo. And that's actually where I like to code that open-ended survey question. The next thing it's going to do is give me a preview of my data. Looking okay, doing some formatting checking. This asks me, where am I going to put some stuff? Everything looks good here. One thing is you do need to tell it. Typically, I like to have my unique ID for each respondent in my first column, and here it's actually stakeholder and not row ID. So we'll go ahead and click next. And then this is where you can clean up your data if you so choose. So you could tell it not to import, for instance, the row ID. Maybe you don't need that. And then it's giving me a preview of the kind of information that's in my stakeholder question and the other questions on the survey. And then you want to make sure NVivo guesses based on the number of characters in each response, whether it's a closed-ended or open-ended survey question. And so you just want to make sure here that that it's guessed correctly. So these two are my open-ended. You can page through a couple of the responses to make sure that it's guessing correctly. The last thing it's going to ask me, because I'm using Plus, is whether I want to go ahead and auto code by theme or by sentiment. And I'm actually going to untick those. I want to do that in just a minute. And it's going to think for a couple seconds. It's going to bring in my survey and do all of the things it told me it was going to do. So it's getting ready the survey data to work with in the software. Okay, so I have these over here called coding stripes, which I have set to automatically come on, so you can look at those later. So this is how survey data looks in NVivo. The gray cells are the closed-ended survey questions, and then we get over here to the white, and these are our open-ended. And this is where you can code what people are saying in your survey. So I can select the text and just say code, and for fun, I'm just going to call this growth. And when I do that, because I have my coding stripes on, it shows me here. These other stripes are for some of the coding that it did to the survey questions, but this growth stripe right here is a theme that I've identified. Another piece of structure that it's created for me are these nodes for open-ended survey questions. So nodes are like buckets for qualitative data. You can use a node to code for themes, but here I can also see all responses to a given survey question in a node. So if I open it up here, this is just all of the responses to question 6 in budget options. And I can scroll down and you see there are coding strips for each of my participants. And I can code from here as well. So I can go code, maybe we'll call this local participants, click OK. And here are the nodes that I have started to identify as themes. So I can open up, see my stripes here as well. So I can open up local participants. And by coding things to a node, I can look across my data sources at how I have identified themes. Back to the question that has my open-ended survey responses. One fun thing that can be helpful, particularly in survey data, because the data are quite short, typically, as opposed to interview data, which tend to be longer, thicker data. There is the ability to quickly, from a given survey question, generate a word cloud, which sometimes you can use to look at your data and say, what words are people using a lot? It might be an interesting way to share quickly the things that people are talking about in a given survey question. So this word cloud is generated from a word frequency query, which you can generate. I used a shortcut to generate it from the question node, but you can generate it on any data you've collected. And you can, of course, share out this word cloud and put it in a report or a presentation. It can be an effective communication tool. Another tool that I wanted to use briefly to generate quite a bit of coding so I can demonstrate another feature in the software is something called auto coding by theme. So auto coding by theme is a feature in NVivo Plus that allows you to quickly code your data based on common noun phrases that it identifies. So it uses an algorithm to code to group together noun phrases. So and I like to say that it's a starting place, not an ending place, and so it is autocode. So I like to maybe start here and begin to sift through things, but it can be a snap way to view what's happening in your data or to begin your analysis. So in the wizard, I want to identify themes, so I'm going to choose this first option. And I've elected to run it on just one survey question. I find that themes can vary widely by survey question, so I like to do it one at a time and then sift through them. You could certainly run it on whole data sources, like the whole survey at once. That's completely up to you. So here we can see some themes that it's identified, and so one of the themes is services. So these are different kinds of services that the responses are talking about, quite a few of them. And then they're also talking about taxes. So you would still need to dig in and figure out what people are saying. And then here it asks me, how broadly do I want to code? For the survey data, I just want to go ahead and grab the whole response in that cell. It's going to live in a folder called auto-coded themes. Then I'll hit finish. So it gives me, create some visualizations of the themes it has created. This is called a hierarchy chart. And it's visualizing my auto coding by theme. So there's the most coding done to services. After that, tax. And then it's also showing me the sub themes that has generated. So here are all the themes right here. And I can break these down. So I can see everything that it's saying about council, for instance. So again, this tool may or may not be helpful for you in your analysis, but I wanted to use it to quickly generate a fair amount of coding so that I can demonstrate something called a crosstab query. So after you have done a fair bit of coding in your survey data or other data, you may want to use a crosstab query to explore how closed-ended survey question, how your themes may vary across depending on, let me rephrase, how your themes may vary based on responses to closed-ended survey questions, so demographics or scaled questions. So I'm just going to add my auto-coded themes. It says here I need to add my code. So you always have to look at it across coding. So you're always looking across coding on your qualitative data. But then what it will do will break down based on response to a survey question. So I want to know, based on agreement with the council, how coding varies by these themes. So when I hit run query, it shows me based on whether they said no, yes, don't know, or no response, where coding was heavier. And I can even use this heat map feature. So this shows me that the most people said yes, and within that, most people who agreed with the budget priorities, they mentioned services. And so there are 26 people who said yes, and this is what they said. So I find this to be a really effective tool, even if you are doing a purely qualitative approach, to highlight places where you have heavy intersections between demographic or other categorical quantitative data and coding that you have done. The sister tool in NVivo to explore your coding, to cross-tabulate your coding, is the matrix coding query. So the difference between the two is the matrix coding looks across codes by codes, whereas the crosstab is specialized to look across attributes and classifications or cross-case analysis. So if you have quantitative data and you want to see how your coding varies by that quantitative data, then you would want to use a crosstab. If you want to explore intersections in your coding across multiple categories simultaneously, that would be a matrix coding. Okay, so I'm going to move on to talking a little bit about how you might use NVivo for something like photo voice, or like I described, the visual reflection data that we had collected. So photo voice, for those of you who don't know, is a qualitative data collection method that involves giving your participants cameras, asking them to go take pictures of things that are important to them, bounded by, for instance, like a program of interest or something else of interest. And then they come back and they write. They choose one or more pictures and they write about them. So you'll end up with photos, and as well as a short description or blurb that goes with the photo. And I've also heard of folks doing a focus group as well, where people may share out or in a classroom share with other students. So you might end up with even further forms of qualitative data from this method as well. And photo voice is a form of participatory action research where you empower the participants to be involved in the process and to tell you what's really interesting, what's important to them, as opposed to you putting your lens as the evaluator on that. So I'm just gonna, again, work with some sample data and show you how you can bring in pictures into NVivo and associate text with them. I'll start by importing a picture. And this is from the sample data as well. And I'll open up this picture and I will turn off my coding stripes so we don't get that over there. And here is a picture of a community in coastal North Carolina. And the title of the picture is Competing Water Uses. And it's a picture of boats. And if you look closely, you begin to understand what some of the competing water uses are. So I have a short blurb that has been written, and you might have a Word document full of these or a spreadsheet. So to associate this with the picture, right next to the picture, you can add what's called a log. To do that, you need to click to edit. And then in the content area, I can simply paste the comment that I have collected about this picture. And I can choose to code either on the picture or in the comment or both. So there are advantages to coding on the picture. So to code on the picture, I simply drag a square around the picture. And I can right click and choose code, and I'll create a new code. We'll call this growth, a code to an existing one. And I can also, to code on the log, I can select the log. I tend to like to right click. I can maybe choose a new node, call it changes. So if I navigate to those codes, I can see, if I open the growth code, I've got the survey response, and then I've got a set of coordinates. And what that's telling me is I have coded on a picture. And if I look at the far right-hand side of the screen, I can click on picture, and it will bring up the part of the picture that I coded to this node. So I can see what's been coded there. To see the text that I have coded, if I click on changes, it shows up just as text. But note that it says it's on this file, competing water uses, that it's on a picture here. And it's showing me when I click on the picture tab that this text is associated with a picture. So NVivo is really helpful in helping you cross-reference where data, or keeping data connected, cross-reference across data, what themes may be emerging. And you can query your coding. So for instance, I mentioned the matrix coding query, which I rely on heavily for analyses. So you can query your coding using the matrix coding query or the coding query, and the crosstab query across any form of data that you have collected. It does not have to be text that you include in those queries. The text search and word frequency queries are text-based, so those are text-focused. But in terms of looking at how your coding may overlap or not overlap with other coding, or how it breaks down by quantitative data you have in your project, it can be in any form. So that really helps facilitate the analysis of some of these more multimedia or arts-based methods that can be a lot more fun to include in your evaluation. So an embedded assessment, the idea behind an embedded assessment, of course, is that you're not administering another survey, that there's something built into the program that you're using to collect data. So the visual reflection data that we collected was just a part of an afternoon where we said, here's a bunch of magazines, middle school girls, go ahead and cut up pictures and tell us about your experience. And they had a lot of fun doing that. They even, we took pictures of their reflections and they took them home. I did want to note as well is that what I demonstrated here was bringing in a picture and adding a log. There are other ways to organize photo voice data. So or visual reflection data. With the visual reflection data, we ended up with a spreadsheet. So we had the first column as who generated that comment, and then we transcribed the comments in the next column, and we brought in the pictures separately, and we organized them together using the feature in NVivo called cases, where we would code a participant's reflection as well as the picture of their visual reflection to a case. So just wanted to note that there's more than one way to organize that kind of data and be successful in the software. Moving next to how you might want to use NVivo more traditionally for interviews or focus groups. And again, this can be a part of something like photo voice, or this is a very common data collection method across evaluation qualitative research. So I have, again, a sample transcript that I want to bring in. So I'm going to start by bringing this in. And this transcript actually has more than one participant. So there's an interviewer and two interviewees. Get this out of the way. So I can see that, the interviewer, Henry, is asking both Patricia and then Richard about their experiences, about how they feel about this place. So one question that I often see, or one challenge that I've seen folks have when working with focus group or multiple interviewee data is, how do I connect these to quantitative data? It's quite simple, by the way, to code these. Just like anything else, I can right-click and code. Maybe I code this to changes, and it brings it together with my other data. I can open up changes real quick. So the process of actually, bringing those in, pretty straightforward, right? And I can look across all these different data sources. But in terms of organizing it, and perhaps I have demographic data about Patricia and Richard, or if I'm doing a focus group, I have 5 participants, and each one of them, I'm really interested in the demographics for each one of them. I need to set up my data so that I can set up the demographics to be paired with that participant's voice. So the tool that I use in NVivo to quickly do that for me is I auto-code, but instead I'm going to use the source style or structure. This is called auto-coding by speaker. Nope, speaker name. This is the one. Sorry. I am going to auto-code by speaker name. And what it's going to do, and this is, like I said, particularly handy for focus groups where you have multiple speakers, is just collect all of that speaker's voice into a case. So NVivo asked me to identify the speaker name. In terms of setting up your transcript here, the really important thing is that you use a consistent identifier or name across your transcript for that speaker. And you don't have to put it in a particular heading style or format. It can be as simple as, Henry colon and what Henry said, Patricia colon and what Patricia said. So here I'll just tell NVivo who it should look for in my focus group. So it should look for Henry. It's going to highlight, I found Henry, and it should look for Patricia. And it's going to highlight, oh, yep, I found Patricia. And then the last one was Richard. Oops. Make sure you spell it right. And it's going to highlight where it finds Richard as well in a different color. Then click next. And then it says, okay, do you want to add it to a new classification or an existing one? So if you have one in your project, you could add it. And perhaps I have the same information from Richard and Patricia that I have from my survey respondents. So if I click finish, first thing I'll show you here is that I have a case with just Patricia's voice in it. So here's what Patricia had to say in our conversation. And then in the classifications, I can bring this up and show you that it's taken my survey data and organized it, and essentially taken out all the quantitative closed-ended survey questions. Down here at the bottom, I should have my additional participants, and I can say, okay, this person is a member of the public, this person is from a voluntary community group, this person is a business person, and begin to assign their attributes. That's the NVivo term for a particular variable or question. One thing I wanted to note is that you can build out, so I just added it to an existing classification. Maybe that's not appropriate for your project. You can build out a new classification if you so choose and bring in your own demographics. You can build it from scratch in the software. You can also here import a classification sheet. So what that means is commonly you might have a spreadsheet that has your demographics for your participants sitting somewhere on your computer. And if that's the case, you don't have to recreate it in NVivo. You can simply import it. And the very crucial thing to making this work, if you have data already in your project and you've already created cases, is that in the first column of that demographic spreadsheet, that must match the name of the cases to the character. And then subsequent columns of the spreadsheet can contain your demographics. Okay, so by the way, if you don't remember that, you can always look in the NVivo sample project at how the classifications are organized, and this is your clue. So your first column should be your participant ID, and then subsequent columns should be any demographic or other quantitative data you've collected about them. All right, so my last topic is to talk about some ways that you might use NVivo to organize your evaluation throughout the evaluation process. So you can use NVivo at the beginning when you are compiling information on a program. You might be doing a literature review, and you can bring that in and use either the same program or a separate one to organize that beginning thinking about the program as you get to know it. So one thing I like to do is create different folders for different kinds of data that I've collected. So for instance, under files, maybe I have data one place that I've collected. I often actually break it down by different kinds of data. So if I wanted to rename this, I could call this survey data, and then create another one called for voice data, and so on. And then I can organize my data. There we go. drag and drop. So here's my survey data, and that's just putting it into a folder. And my photo voice data, there we go. Reorganize my screen a little bit, make it a little bit easier. Then I'm going to create another new folder for my literature, because you may want this literature about your program to live a little bit separately from the data you've collected. You might have a different use for it. So I'll go ahead, I've got an article that I've just found about qualitative and quantitative synergies in program evaluation. And I'm going to bring that in. And once it's in, this is a PDF, you can use it, you can code it like any other text-based data. So one thing you may want to do here, you can turn off bookmarks, you can reorganize your screen a little bit, and you can also zoom out. So this is a really old article that I found on Google. And you can code in this, provided that the text is recognized like any other piece of text. And one of the things that I often do when organizing my literature is code by different part of the paper, right? So I might have a node called abstract. I might have a node called introduction, and then I can further code for the various pieces of information that emerge in this abstract. If you don't have, so this is all text-based data, but here we have a table. So if you don't have a PDF in which the text has been recognized or OCR'd, or you've got a visual or a table that you want to code in your PDF or report, you can switch it in NVivo from text to region. And I find this is a really helpful tool. So I'm not like coding bits of tables and wondering what I'm looking at when I open the node. Just like with the picture, I can grab this part of the table and code it to, maybe this is about, just for fun, we'll code it to local participants. And I can open up local participants. Again, it gives me a set of coordinates that tells me, ooh, I've got some visual data. And over on the right-hand side of the screen, I can see, very nice, good to have a big screen, by the way, when you're working in NVivo. I can see what I have coded here in context, in the format that was intended. So in my PDF. And one way this might be really beneficial is if there are pictures embedded in a PDF. Maybe you've collected your photo voice data as a PDF. So it has numerous tools, numerous uses in the software. And I think that NVivo is a great tool to organize your literature, particularly if you're working in a subject area over time, and you can just create this database of organized literature that you can refer to and quite easily write literature reviews or other background information. There are a couple of mapping tools that I said that we would touch on. And so running down to maps over here, I can close all of these. Maybe give myself a little more room. There we go. There are two kind of maps that I wanted to play with a little bit today. So at the beginning of working with a program, one of the first steps we often do is create a logic model, right? There are many tools that you can use to create a logic model. I've done it in PowerPoint, and I'm sure there are others specialized to create logic models. In NVivo, you could, if you wanted to, create a logic model. And the tool that I thought would be quickest and easiest to do that is a mind map. So a mind map organizes information hierarchically, and you can see over here on the left-hand side of the screen that you can organize it horizontally or vertically. Mind maps are often vertical. I'm sorry, logic models are often vertical. So I might date this logic model. I could call this, logic model March 12, 2020. And under this shape, I can add sibling or child shapes. So for instance, I want to, so the various areas of the logic model include resources, activities. Everybody has a slightly different way, but generally resources are inputs, activities, outputs, outcomes, and long-term outcomes are impact. You might have short-term, medium-term, long-term, and so on. So here are different parts of the logic model, and I can create ideas underneath them to begin to add specific parts of my program. So resources might include staff and funding. Activities might include after-school program or an in-school program. Outputs might be, you get the idea. Outputs might be a number of participants. And you can begin to build this out. And it's a really, one of the reasons I like this is it's a really clean way to begin to organize your thinking. Pretty easy to create in terms of adding shapes. You can format these shapes. So if you wanted to color code some of these areas, you certainly could do that. So you can change the fill color if you wanted to. You could increase the text size if that's too small for your eyes. You can increase the shape size. You can edit it if you've spelled resources wrong. And you can tell it to, oh, relay that out for me if I have, make all my lines straight, if you've reorganized things. Another common tool in evaluation is a theory of change. Again, there are many ways to create these theories of change, but you could, for instance, in NVivo, use a concept map, which is the most free form types of maps in the software. So the concept map allows you to add shapes. So sample theory of change. Those shapes could be any one of these shapes. I'm going to add a person shape. I can resize that. But I can also add project items. So project items might include a node, for instance. And then I can use other shapes to, maybe I want to visualize how, somebody participates, there's a change that happens, and we achieve an outcome. I can add connectors. And by dragging them a particular direction, I can indicate directionality of the change. And then I can color code it if I want to. Change the color, and I can add text. So again, this is just another way for you to think about how NVivo can be a part of your evaluation process in terms of visualizing your program theory as well. And the last thing that I'll touch on is you could, for instance, also use NVivo to organize your thoughts or ideas that you're having throughout the evaluation process. I encourage folks to keep a research journal or reflections on how things are going in your analytical process. Over here in memos is where I recommend that you do that. So memos are places for you to capture thoughts or ideas about the process. I can create a new memo in NVivo. And I can type in here, make my coding stripes go away, not relevant right now. There's a keyboard shortcut called, you can hold down Control, Shift, and T to time and date stamp it. And you can type in here questions you might want to bring up to your team, how things are going, maybe places where you have challenges, and so on. And you can create memos within NVivo, but perhaps you have gone to a meeting with your program partner and you want to, you've typed up your meeting minutes and you want to store them in here as well. So you can bring in memos as well. They don't have to start in NVivo. and you can bring in your meeting minutes from any particular meeting that you have with your project partner. So it really becomes a database of all of the work that you were doing as a part of the evaluation. And if you wanted to, you could choose to code meeting minutes as well. Again, just right click. And you can code. All right, so to wrap up, and then we'll turn to some questions, I'll move back to my PowerPoint. So in summary, NVivo is an organizational and analytical tool, and once you're up and running, can really be an invaluable part of your analysis and data management process in evaluation work, and I've certainly found that's the case in my work. In addition to systematic analysis of qualitative data, NVivo can bring together many forms of data over a duration of a project. You can do everything from a sophisticated in-depth analysis to a speedy review of key terms and phrases that are in your data. And qualitative data can play a really critical role in understanding a program, as well as highlighting and lifting participant voices and experiences. And it's crucial to a culturally responsive and equitable approaches in evaluation as well. Okay.
Did you want me to talk about this, Noelle?
Yes,
okay.
Yeah.
So,
And one of the tools, so I'll just I'll transition here. One of the tools that I neglected to mention as I was talking about working with interviews and focus groups is NVivo has its own transcription feature. So Stacy, do you want to talk about that?
Sure. So I just have a list of different products that might help you with your evaluation program analysis. So if you are doing interviews or focus groups and recording them with audio or video, we do have NVivo transcription, which automatically transcribes it for you. So think of it as a transcription assistant. If you bring in a 60-minute interview audio, NVivo takes about 30 minutes to transcribe it. There's an editor feature that you can then go in, and if you need to change things, you can. You can either use NVivo transcription by itself as its own product, but it also integrates with NVivo, so you can bring it then does everything right in NVivo transcription, and you can then start coding and working with your data. So just go to our website. You can look at it and get a 15-minute free trial too. And then Noelle showed you NVivo 12 Plus, which has the auto coding and with sentiment and themes. If you're working as a team, we have NVivo for Teams, which helps you collaborate. So that's another thing that might be of interest to you. And then we also have training and consultancy. And Noelle is one of our excellent trainers, as you could see today from her presentation. I will also let you know that NVivo, the new NVivo is going to be released on March 18th. So you can also go to our website to see the new features. One of the new features, which is pretty exciting, is we will also have NVivo Collaboration Cloud module, and that also might be of interest to people that are doing working in teams. So thanks, Noelle. If you go to the next slide. And then I just wanted to talk about what I'm working on in the NVivo community, which again is meant to connect with fellow researchers. So the community is doing things like these webinars, doing podcasts that'll be out soon. We're creating research networks either at an organization or campus, and we're going to start doing some online so that you can connect with researchers. So if you want to sign up to get a newsletter and get more information about what's up and coming with the community, you can see it two ways. There's a URL there, and then also my email. I also put the link in the chat area of the GoToWebinar, so you can just go right from there to sign up. And I also want to mention the PowerPoint. There's a handout in the menu to GoToWebinar menu, so you can download that handout, which is the PowerPoint presentation today. And I think the next, just upcoming webinars, we have 3 more scheduled for this series that we did for the spring. You can find that on our website. And then the next slide, questions. So we do have some questions, so I'll read them out to you.
Cool.
Noelle, very nice job. I learned a lot myself.
Oh,
Um,
great.
can this software deal with check all that apply response options for questions? So I'm not sure. Does that make sense to
Yes,
you? Okay.
yes, it does.
Okay.
So if you have, so it's like, so what I would recommend there is if you have a check all that apply, that you turn them into Boolean or yes, no. So rather than have a single column that has like, I checked this response, A, B, and C, that might be separated by commas when you bring it out of your survey. I recommend you switch that into, did you check A, yes, no, in a single column. And then you can look at, it's much easier to use in something like a crosstab query. And we even do that in statistical analysis as well. If we, for instance, in Qualtrics, there's a feature when you export to tell it to separate that into separate that kind of question and create sort of dummies, essentially. And it's the same recommendation in NVivo, which is to separate those out, and then it's much easier to use in a crosstab query, for instance, and say, did this person check this? Yes, no, and how did we code for themes?
Great. Another question is, as a qualitative research learner, does NVivo have links to dummy qualitative data in the tutorials? And I think that's what you were using, basically the sample data, correct?
Yes, so there is a sample project, and there are more coming. It's very exciting. There are going to be multiple sample projects that you can use to learn how to do qualitative research and evaluation. So that was what I was using the combination of different kinds of sample data that we have in NVivo, with the exception of the PDF and some of the quotes and such. I pulled those down myself, but yes, the short answer is yes. There's sample data that you can play with.
And there's a question about the recording. So this has been recorded, and we'll be sending out with a follow-up email. It's generally 24 hours from the webinar, so it will be tomorrow, but it will have the link to the recording in it, so you can watch it again. Here's another question. In terms of organizing the evaluation process, what is your experience with creating nodes? Do you use the evaluation criteria questions as your nodes from the beginning, or do you do it in a more intuitive manner?
I think more the latter. So I don't create an evaluation question as a node. So I'll just speak to an example that a program that we also, the program that we did the visual reflections with, we also did interviews. And in that program, what we did was we had nodes for different program elements. We had nodes for different outcomes of interest. So for instance, an outcome was social personal development. And underneath that, we had sub nodes for increased confidence, more feeling confident you can make friends, and so on, self-efficacy. And so we coded for those outcomes, we coded for program elements, we coded for what could be a barrier and facilitator, we coded for various actors who were involved with the program. And one of the queries we were able to run at the end of that, for instance, was to, across our program elements, look at which outcomes were being achieved where. So we used a matrix coding query to say, okay, across the coding of program elements, where people mentioned those elements, where are we seeing that overlap with coding for the outcomes of interest? So that's typically what I do. I break down an evaluation question and really look for the outcomes of interest, perhaps the activities. So the coding may follow more along a logic model than the broader evaluation question.
Great, thank you. So here's a question on how do you share with project partners?
That's a good question. So project partners may not have NVivo, of course. And so you can export virtually any visualization you create in the software. So that logic model that I demoed for you all, you can export that as an image and share that with your partners. You can export word clouds and any other visualization that you create with your partners. You can export contents of nodes, share that with your partners. So there are a lot of ways to take your analysis out of the software and share with those who don't have access to it.
And I will say the new collaboration, well, yeah, no, I guess you do have to have NVivo to do that. Never mind. But
Yeah.
that could be a solution too that's coming. Can one code, one source to various codes in one go?
Say that one more time.
Sure.
And
Can one code, one source to various codes in one go?
Yes. So I was coding primarily by right click today. And what you could do is if you have all of those nodes existing, you could, for instance, select an area of text, right click, choose code, and then hold down the control key to select multiple nodes at once. And in fact, we recommend that you do that because then you can take advantage of those querying capabilities to look at overlaps between your codes.
Cool. And then one last question. So saying thank you for this very informative session. How do you track changes on your recoding processes? Oftentimes I will code documents, revisit them, and find that the codes are needing to change to reflect new knowledge or gained insights. Is there a way to
Yeah.
track the progression of coding within NVivo?
So what I would recommend, it's a really good question, and thank you for being here today. It's fun for me to talk about. But in terms of tracking your coding process, what I typically do is I write about it. I reflect in a memo about the changes that need to be made, and I think about when I may want to change how I'm defining a code. And a couple of tools that can help you track. One is you can export a code book from your nodes, your list of nodes in NVivo, and you can also add descriptions to your nodes, which become the definitions for your codes in your code book. So if you export that code book over time, that's one way for you to change or track how it's changed. Reflecting and writing about how it's changed and new things that you're seeing, that's another way. And another way is, and it's a general best practice, create backup copies of your project over time. So I actually create a backup copy anytime I do significant work. So if I sit there and I code data for 2 or 3 hours, I'll create a backup copy with that date. And that will, if something goes sideways, computer catches fire or whatever, I have that copy living somewhere safe. And that's another way for you to sort of see and return to how your analysis was and how it's evolved over time.
Great. Thank you so much, Noelle. This was a great session. Like I said, I learned a lot. I'm sure everyone on the webinar learned a lot today too. And thank you everyone for joining. Like I said, the recording will be sent out tomorrow. And if you have any questions, actually, if you go to the next screen, we have our contact information too. But you also get that email. So if you have any other questions, we're happy to help you with that. So again, have a great rest of your day. And thanks, Noelle.
Thank you.